come back to you later on and ask you to summarise how you make the business case, but before we do that, let's ask John to summarise, either here or there as you wish. Yeah, over there.
So, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation. I fear, and this is going to be my introduction to my slot here, I fear that I may be what I would call the only mainstream mass market tourism industry person here. Is that true? Does anyone else claim to be kind of truly mass market industry? There you go. So you've identified one challenge in all of this. So I'm someone that comes from a career in mainstream tourism, 20-something years, and I've spent the last year at ABTA, and I've known these two for a little while now. I've got to know them much better in the last year, and I think the reason I've been invited along, although I may ask that question later on, is to try and give a sort of mainstream industry thoughts here to help prompt discussion. I've been working at ABTA for the last year, and I've been involved with putting together sustainability team, and for the first time ever in ABTA's history, we now have 9 people working full-time on sustainability. That comes from a heritage of doing broadly nothing. That's a dangerous thing to say when you're being recorded, isn't it? Certainly not enough. Through a more recent history of doing quite a lot of work around specific tools, particularly on the environmental side of things, and moving on in the relatively recent past to have a much more or broader and more mature look at sustainability. And this agenda sits in our vocabulary within that. I think it's quite sad and quite telling that it's really only come into our industry language in the context of the very recent past, and we might perhaps discuss why that's the case. I guess part of the answer is that the mainstream tourism industry, for the most part, has really thought of something as the benefits of tourism just flow out of doing good business, and it's not, if you like, any part of the industry's responsibility to design in particular outcomes, whether you're talking about pro-poor tourism or pretty much anything else, to be honest. If you do tourism well, if it's a good business, if it's profitable for the destinations and for you, then those benefits flow out of it. And the notion of designing mainstream tourism in such a way that it's more likely to give the optimum benefit for pro-poor or anything else, it's not really something a part of the industry's thinking, and I'd like to suggest that's something where there would be merit in further work within the industry and further work within academic and NGO world as well. That kind of is a way of saying it's not part of our purpose, and that can't be right, can it? But if it is part of our purpose, then surely we should be thinking about it. So why is that the case? Why, if an industry has such a fantastic story as to the potential of the benefits it can bring to the poor in the world, aren't we doing better? And I think, again, that would be something I'd be fascinated to hear views from all of you on. A couple of thoughts from me. I think there's a different sort of poverty here, a poverty of knowledge. I think the book tells us that there's a poverty of knowledge within the research and academic sector. Certainly a poverty, huge gaps, an absence of completeness, an absence of joined up thinking. I am not qualified to make a judgment on that, but it's one of the key things I took from the very good book which I just finished reading this morning, if I'm honest. I commend it to you all. It's a very good read. I think there's a poverty of knowledge in the industry in relation to this whole area. I don't think the industry has a kind of a language, a way of thinking about strategies that are more likely to be pro-poor in their outcomes, and I think that's something we need to think about. The industry really has no visibility, believe it or not, in relation to the research that does exist. Yes, you'll find a group of people in the industry who I know very well, 20 or 30 people engaged in this debate, but in that great travel and tourism industry out there, I don't believe there's a very high level of knowledge engagement with this at all. I think there's much we can do there. And I think there's a bit of a poverty of leadership, which is perhaps a function of the things I've said before. Unless through our academic teachings in travel and tourism in the most general sense, we start actually developing leaders for the future that are literate in relation to this area, then I guess not much will change very quickly. So my particular interest and thing I'd like to hear views on is really how we take this agenda, not to, however wonderful the destinations may be, and however wonderful the businesses working in particular niches might be, how do we bring it to mainstream? How do we bring it to part of the industry that perhaps has the greatest potential to leverage change? And how do we sell that? Jonathan's point, the business case. If, as I believe will be the case, that whether it's climate change, the cost of carbon, regulation, other factors, tourism, outbound tourism from the rich world becomes more and more constrained by factors outside of its control for the first time, my industry is going to need to find its proper place in the world. It's going to have to find its true social purpose, and pro-poor tourism surely must be part of that. And it's part of our job at ABTA, I believe, to start to equip the industry to have a sort of different dialogue, different thought process towards that before it's perhaps too late for the industry. So I have a particular kind of view or subset that I'm interested in speaking about, but I hope it will be of interest to others here, so I'd be keen to hear views. The organised travel industry has been referred to a couple of times in the introductions. Of course, organised travel is becoming less organised. We have about 70 million ex-UK tourism trips a year now, more than our population, which tells you something about our society. About 46 million of those are by air, and of those 46 million, only about half of those are now in the context of what we traditionally think of as organised travel with a holiday company, with a tour operator, whatever you might call it. So in fact, the industry is getting more and more difficult to get at as well. And what that implies is that I think we need to think more and more about the consumer as well, because the consumer is organising. There may be intermediaries involved, but the consumer is more and more in charge of the travel. Now that's an opportunity and a threat to engaging with them. And Jonathan tells us the consumer's the best vehicle for change and the best way to access the value in the pro-poor context. I'm sure that's right from my readings, but of course it's easier to get at corporates in some way. So a few thoughts from me, which I hope are helpful, and I think hand it back to you, Simon, to open up for questions.
John, thank you very much.